What happens when one of Hollywood's most outspoken actors sits down with a television host known for his aggressive questioning style? Well, you're about to find out, and trust me, it gets intense fast. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because this story is going to blow your mind. Samuel L. Jackson walked into the Good Morning America studio that morning, expecting a routine promotional interview for his latest film. The legendary actor, known for his commanding presence both on and off screen, had done hundreds of these interviews over his decades-long career. But what he didn't expect was George Stephanopoulos in one of his most confrontational moods. The tension started building even before the cameras rolled. Backstage, Jackson could hear Stephanopoulos talking to his producers about wanting to dig deeper than the usual fluff questions. "I'm tired of these softball interviews," Stephanopoulos was saying, his voice carrying that particular edge that his colleagues had learned to recognize as trouble brewing. When Jackson took his seat across from the host, the atmosphere in the studio felt different. The usual pre-interview small talk was clipped and perfunctory. Stephanopoulos barely looked up from his notes as he adjusted his tie and checked his earpiece. The crew seemed to sense something was off too, glancing nervously between the two men as they prepared for what they thought would be a standard entertainment segment. "We're live in 30 seconds, the floor director announced. And that's when Stephanopoulos finally made eye contact with Jackson. There was something cold in his gaze, something that suggested this wasn't going to be the friendly chat the actor had been promised. "Good morning, I'm George Stephanopoulos, and we're here with Samuel L. Jackson." The host began once they were live, his professional smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Samuel, thanks for joining us this morning to talk about your new film." "Good morning, George," Jackson replied, settling back in his chair with that characteristic confidence that had made him a screen legend. "Happy to be here." But Stephanopoulos wasn't interested in pleasantries. Almost immediately, he shifted into attack mode. "Samuel, before we talk about the movie, I want to address something that's been bothering me about your recent comments regarding the film industry. You've been quite vocal about certain issues, and frankly, some people are questioning whether you're the right person to be making these statements." Jackson's eyebrows shot up. This wasn't what they'd discussed with the producers. "I'm sorry, what exactly are you referring to, George?" "Well, you've made some pretty strong accusations about how the industry operates, about fairness and representation. But when I look at your career, you've been one of the biggest beneficiaries of that same system you're now criticizing. Isn't that a bit hypocritical?" The studio fell silent, except for the low hum of the cameras. Jackson leaned forward slightly, his voice remaining calm but with an edge that anyone who knew him would recognize as a warning sign. "George, I think you might want to clarify what you mean by that, because it sounds like you're suggesting I don't have the right to speak about issues I've experienced firsthand." Stephanopoulos pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the dangerous territory he was entering. "I'm just saying that for someone who's made millions of dollars from this industry, complaining about it seems a bit rich, don't you think? You've been in some of the biggest blockbusters of all time. How exactly have you been disadvantaged?" "Hold up," Jackson said, his voice dropping to that low, measured tone that had intimidated countless characters on screen. "Are you seriously sitting there trying to tell me that because I've been successful, I should just shut up about the problems I've seen and experienced? That because I've made money, racism doesn't exist?" The host shifted uncomfortably, but doubled down. "I'm not saying racism doesn't exist, Samuel. I'm saying that maybe someone in your position isn't the best spokesperson for these issues. Maybe someone who hasn't benefited so much from the system would have more credibility." Jackson's jaw tightened visibly. The cameras caught every micro-expression as his famous intensity began to build. "More credibility? George, let me explain something to you. The fact that I've achieved success doesn't erase the years of being typecast, of being told I was too this or too that, of watching less talented actors get roles because they fit a certain look. Success doesn't immunize you from discrimination. It just gives you a platform to talk about it." But Stephanopoulos wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by Jackson's reaction. "But don't you think that your success story actually contradicts your narrative? Here you are, one of the highest-grossing actors of all time, sitting in a television studio promoting another major film. Where exactly is the systematic oppression in that?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jackson stared at Stephanopoulos for a long moment, and viewers at home could practically see the temperature in the room dropping. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made people listen. "George, I'm going to give you one chance to rethink the direction of this conversation, Because right now, you're sounding like someone who's never had to fight for anything in your life. You want to talk about my success? Let's talk about how I had to work twice as hard for half the recognition for the first 20 years of my career. Let's talk about the scripts I was offered that were nothing but stereotypes. Let's talk about the meetings where I was told I was too intimidating, too urban, too whatever code word they were using that week. Stephanopoulos leaned back slightly, but his voice remained challenging. But that's ancient history now, isn't it? The industry has changed. You've been in some of the most prestigious films of the last 2 decades. Marvel movies, Quentin Tarantino films, major studio pictures. How is that not progress? Progress? Jackson's voice rose slightly, just enough for everyone in the studio to feel the shift. George, do you know how many times I've been the only black actor in those big-budget films? Do you know how many times I've walked onto sets where people assumed I was there to deliver lunch instead of deliver lines? Progress isn't one person breaking through barriers. It's tearing those barriers down for everyone. The host seemed to sense he was losing control of the interview, but instead of pulling back, he pushed harder. Samuel, with all due respect, you're starting to sound like someone who's looking for problems where they don't exist anymore. Maybe the real issue is that some people just don't want to admit that things have gotten better. That was the moment everything changed. Jackson's eyes flashed with something that made everyone in the studio suddenly very aware of why he'd been so convincing, playing intimidating characters throughout his career. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. George, I need you to be very careful about your next words, because you're about to cross a line that you really don't want to cross. But Stephanopoulos either didn't hear the warning in Jackson's voice or chose to ignore it completely. The host had clearly decided that this was his moment to make a name for himself by taking down one of Hollywood's biggest stars, and he wasn't going to back down now. Samuel, I think what's happening here is exactly what I'm talking about, Stephanopoulos said with a condescending smile that made the crew members exchange worried glances. The moment someone asks you tough questions about your positions, you resort to intimidation tactics. Isn't that exactly the kind of behavior that gives your critics ammunition? Jackson sat perfectly still for a moment, processing what he'd just heard. The studio was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system humming overhead. When he finally responded, his voice had taken on that measured, dangerous quality that anyone familiar with his work would recognize. Intimidation tactics? Jackson repeated slowly, each word deliberate and precise. George, let me be crystal clear about something. Me telling you that you're about to cross a line isn't intimidation. It's a courtesy. It's me giving you a chance to remember that you're supposed to be a professional journalist, not some tabloid hack looking for a gotcha moment. Stephanopoulos' face flushed slightly, but he pressed on. I'm asking legitimate questions about your public statements. If you can't handle that kind of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be making those statements in the first place. Handle scrutiny? Jackson's laugh was sharp and humorless. George, I've been handling scrutiny since before you knew what a teleprompter was. But there's a difference between legitimate questions and what you're doing right now, which is trying to delegitimize my experiences because they don't fit your comfortable narrative. The host leaned forward, sensing what he thought was an opening. Your experiences or your agenda? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're using your platform to push a particular political viewpoint. And when someone challenges that, you get defensive. That's when Jackson's composure finally cracked, just slightly, but enough for everyone watching to see the flash of genuine anger in his eyes. Political viewpoint? George, equality isn't a political viewpoint. It's a human right. But I guess that's something you wouldn't understand. Sitting in your ivory tower, never having to worry about whether you got a job because of your talent or because you fit someone's idea of what a person in your position should look like. Stephanopoulos bristled at the personal attack. Now, hold on just a minute. I've worked hard to get where I am, and I don't appreciate the implication that I haven't earned my position. Oh, you don't appreciate it? Jackson's voice dripped with sarcasm. Well, imagine how I feel when you sit there and imply that my decades of experience with discrimination don't matter because I eventually found success despite it. The difference is, I'm not questioning your right to have your job. I'm questioning your competence to do it. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Producers were frantically whispering into their headsets, and camera operators were zooming in to catch every facial expression. This had gone far beyond a standard interview and was rapidly becoming something else entirely. My competence? Stephanopoulos' voice rose, his professional demeanor finally starting to crack. I've been doing this job for decades. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, Nobel Prize winners. I think I know how to conduct an interview. Jackson shook his head slowly, a bitter smile playing at the corners of his mouth. George, interviewing presidents doesn't make you presidential. And right now, you're acting like someone who's never been told no in his life, throwing a tantrum because your guest won't play along with your little ambush. Ambush? Stephanopoulos shot back. This is journalism, Samuel. This is what happens when public figures make controversial statements. They get asked about them. If you can't handle that, maybe you should stick to reading scripts instead of writing op-eds. The insult hung in the air like a slap. Jackson's eyes narrowed, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of controlled fury that had made him one of the most compelling actors of his generation. "Did you just tell me to stick to reading scripts?" Jackson asked, his voice so quiet that everyone in the studio had to strain to hear him. "Did you really just try to put me in my place, like some kind of performing monkey who should be grateful for the scraps you throw him?" Stephanopoulos realized he'd gone too far, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "That's not what I said, and you know it. I'm saying that maybe entertainment figures should focus on entertainment instead of trying to be political commentators." Entertainment figures? Jackson's voice was getting louder now, and there was no mistaking the anger building behind it. "George, I'm not just an entertainment figure. I'm a citizen, I'm a taxpayer, I'm a human being with eyes and a brain and 5 decades of life experience. But you want to reduce me to just an entertainer because it's easier for you to dismiss what I'm saying if you can convince people I don't have the right to say it." The host was sweating now, beads of perspiration visible on his forehead despite the studio's air conditioning. "Samuel, I think you're reading things into this conversation that aren't there. I'm simply trying to have an honest discussion about your public statements." "Honest?" Jackson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "George, there's nothing honest about what you're doing. You came into this interview with an agenda, and that agenda was to make me look like an angry black man who doesn't know his place. Well, congratulations, you got half of it right. I am angry, but not for the reasons you think." Stephanopoulos tried to regain control of the situation. "I think we're getting off track here. Let's try to refocus on your new film, which is why you're here." But Jackson wasn't having it. "No, George, let's not change the subject now. You wanted to have this conversation, so let's have it. You want to know what makes me angry? It's sitting across from someone who has never had to fight for respect, never had to prove himself beyond the accident of his birth, trying to lecture me about how I should respond to discrimination. You want to know what privilege looks like? It's the confidence to tell someone else that their lived experiences don't matter." The studio fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of shock rather than anticipation. Stephanopoulos opened his mouth to respond, but Jackson held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not finished," Jackson said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. "You asked me if I thought I was the right person to speak about these issues. Well, let me ask you something, George. What makes you think you're the right person to tell me I'm not?" The question landed like a physical blow. Stephanopoulos sat back in his chair, finally seeming to realize that he was in over his head. But Jackson wasn't done with him yet. Stephanopoulos tried to recover his footing, but Jackson had seized complete control of the conversation. The host's carefully constructed persona was cracking under pressure, and everyone in the studio could see it happening in real time. "Samuel, I think you're mischaracterizing what I'm trying to do here," Stephanopoulos said, his voice noticeably shakier than it had been at the start of the interview. "I'm just asking the questions that our viewers want answered." Jackson's response was swift and devastating. "Your viewers? George, your viewers tuned in to hear about a movie, not to watch you try to humiliate a guest for your own ego. But since you brought up what people want to know, let me tell you what I think they really want to know. They want to know why a supposedly professional journalist thinks it's appropriate to ambush someone who came here in good faith." The host's face was now visibly red, a combination of embarrassment and anger. "This isn't an ambush, it's journalism. Real journalism asks hard questions." "Hard questions?" Jackson's voice rose to a level that made the sound technicians wince. "George, you haven't asked me a single hard question this entire time. You've made accusations, you've dismissed my experiences, and you've tried to silence me. That's not journalism. That's just bad television." Stephanopoulos made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Samuel, I think you're being overly sensitive about this. Maybe if you could just answer the questions instead of attacking me personally, we could have a productive conversation." That was the final straw. Jackson stood up so abruptly that his chair rolled backward, the sudden movement causing everyone in the studio to jump. His imposing figure cast a shadow over the still-seated host as he looked down at him with undisguised contempt. Overly sensitive? Jackson's voice was now at full volume, filling every corner of the studio. George, you have spent the last 10 minutes trying to tell me that my life experiences don't matter, that my success invalidates my right to speak about injustice, and that I should just shut up and be grateful. And when I respond to that with anything other than submissive gratitude, you call me overly sensitive? Stephanopoulos shrank back in his chair, finally seeming to understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. Samuel, please sit down. Let's try to have a civil conversation. Civil? Jackson's laugh was harsh and bitter. You want to talk about civil? George, there was nothing civil about your approach from the moment I sat down. You came into this with preconceived notions and a script designed to make me look bad. And now that it's backfiring, you want to hide behind calls for civility? The host tried one more time to salvage the situation. I was just trying to challenge your positions, to give you a chance to defend your statements. Isn't that what good journalism is supposed to do? Jackson leaned forward, placing his hands on the desk between them, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that had made him famous. George, let me explain something to you about challenging positions. When you challenge someone's position, you engage with their arguments. You present counter-evidence. You ask probing questions that force them to think deeper. What you don't do is attack their right to have those positions in the first place. The silence that followed was deafening. Stephanopoulos sat frozen, seemingly unable to formulate a response. The crew members were looking anywhere but at the two men, clearly uncomfortable with the level of tension in the room. Jackson straightened up, adjusting his jacket with deliberate precision. You know what the real tragedy is here, George? You had one of the most respected actors in Hollywood sitting across from you, someone with decades of stories, insights, and experiences that your viewers would have found fascinating. Instead of tapping into that, you decided to turn this into some kind of gotcha moment for your own gratification. Stephanopoulos finally found his voice, though it came out as little more than a croak. Samuel, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Maybe we can start over. Talk about your film like we originally planned. Start over? Jackson's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. George, you can't unring a bell. You can't spend 15 minutes disrespecting someone and then ask for a do-over when it doesn't go the way you plan. That's not how respect works, and it's certainly not how professional relationships work. The host made one final, desperate plea. Please, Samuel, let's just try to salvage this interview. I'm sure we can find some common ground. Jackson shook his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment crossing his features. Common ground? George, the only common ground we have is that we're both sitting in this studio right now, and frankly, I'm about to change that. Stephanopoulos' eyes widened as he realized what Jackson was implying. Wait, you can't just leave. We're in the middle of a live broadcast. Watch me, Jackson replied, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. You see, George, that's the beautiful thing about being Samuel L. Jackson. I don't have to sit here and let someone disrespect me for the entertainment of morning television viewers. I have enough self-respect to walk away from people who don't know how to treat others with basic human dignity. The host's professional mask finally slipped completely, revealing the panic underneath. Samuel, please, think about what you're doing. This will be everywhere in an hour. Is this really how you want to be remembered? Jackson paused at the edge of the set, turning back to face Stephanopoulos one last time. George, I've been in this business long enough to know that how I'm remembered depends entirely on who's telling the story. And something tells me that when people see this footage, they're going to remember the host who thought he could bully Samuel L. Jackson and learn the hard way that some people don't play those games. With that, Jackson walked off the set, leaving Stephanopoulos sitting alone at the desk, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing the host's stunned expression as he tried to process what had just happened. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Stephanopoulos finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. But everyone watching knew that when they came back, Samuel L. Jackson would be long gone, and George Stephanopoulos would have to explain to his producers, his network, and his viewers exactly how he had managed to single-handedly destroy what should have been a routine promotional interview. The aftermath in the studio was immediate and chaotic. Producers rushed onto the set. Crew members stood around in shocked silence, and Stephanopoulos sat at his desk, staring at the spot where Jackson had been sitting just moments before, finally understanding the full weight of his professional miscalculation. So there you have it, folks. That's what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And in this case, George Stephanopoulos was definitely not prepared for the opportunity to interview one of Hollywood's most formidable personalities. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment below with your thoughts. Do you think Samuel L. Jackson was right to walk out, or should he have stayed and tried to salvage the interview?